Hello, thank you so much for coming to watch another video. Today I am doing a abstract pattern. I'm not really trying to draw anything specific, just a bunch of repeating shapes, lots of half circles and parallel lines is what's on the docket today. You will see at the beginning that I kind of started partway through. I think about a quarter of the page was filled, and I decided I liked where it was going, so I was going to dedicate the rest of the drawing to a video. So here we are. Now, the reason that I am doing a pattern like this is twofold. There were a couple specific things I wanted to get out of the drawing when I was all done with it. The first is practicing consistency. So I have been reading a book by Alfonso Dunn, and it's kind of a book, but more of a demonstration pamphlet, I guess you could call it. The Basics of Pen and Ink Drawing, or Intro to Pen and Ink Drawing by Alfonso Dunn. And the book is basically just a series of demonstrations of pattern and how to do things like shade, add volume, use your pen to create specific strokes, right? And a lot of what goes on in the very beginning of that book, which is where I'm at, I kind of read one of the exercises or points he makes in the book and then try and replicate that on a drawing or a sketch of my own. One of the things that he's discussing at length is consistency, and that is something that is kind of the basis of a lot of good art, I think, is the ability to know what you want the drawing to look like and then to be able to execute on that in a repeatable way. So I have a lot of drawings that I'm very proud of, but I feel as though I kind of happened upon the texture or got lucky with the shading, or something happened when I was drawing that just ended up looking like what I wanted, not so much created with intent. So the purpose of making this big drawing of just lines and patterns is to expressly practice recreating and consistency. You will see a couple times throughout, like just now, as I draw these parallel lines. They're not entirely perfect, or close to perfect. Throughout the drawing a lot, I will take out a ruler. I've cut a lot of it out, but as I'm drawing these parallel lines and layers of pattern, I'll use a ruler to reset the record, so to speak, and make sure that I am revisiting a bar of consistency throughout the drawing. So if you see me bust out a ruler, that is what I'm doing, and if you see me trying to freehand it, I'm trying to get out of my comfort zone and see if I can't be a bit consistent. One bad habit I noticed throughout this drawing, and that I was trying to actively work around, is drawing from the wrist, not the forearm. So when you're drawing these straight lines and trying to create parallel lines, even if they are fairly small like a lot of these are, using your elbow as a fulcrum or pivot point, whatever would be the better word, rather than your wrist will give you a more consistent stroke. That's some advice that I did not take myself a lot of the times, but whenever I caught myself doing that, I tried to correct. So just ongoing practice there. Long story short, primary goal with this is mark making consistency. For example, if you're going to be drawing something with contours or different levels of shade, you're going to want to be able to match your pattern for every zone, no matter where it is on the drawing. So if you have a very dark section on the far left of your drawing and a very dark section on the far right, but what you're trying to draw has equal lighting in those two sections, if that makes sense, equal value at those 2 points, you're going to want to be able to make them the same value, not just kind of hope that your drawing ends up consistently dark in those two spots. And that's going to be done through practice of consistency. I do these drawings a lot and then I stop them. So I'll start a big page of patterns. Actually, the two previous sheets in my sketchbook of in order were me trying to start a drawing like this and then either accidentally smudging it or running out of steam or making a pattern that was really inconsistent or really terrible in my point of view. And the big mental barrier with these drawings is that they don't so much take artistic skill. It's more of just having enough patience to follow through to the end. Anybody can draw little half circles or bumps or triangles. It's just a matter of being willing to draw hundreds of half circles and triangles and bumps and lines. So if anybody sat down with intent, they'd be able to do it. It's not like trying to draw a representation of a human or some great landscape where you really need to think about composition and how accurate your representation is and all of that kind of stuff. It's really just hours at a table. This particular drawing, most of this video is at 800% speed, and the drawing itself took, I'd say, 4.5 hours. 4.5 hours of what I filmed, and then I had a quarter of it done before that. So probably like a total of 5 hours, 5.5, somewhere around there, which is not that big of a time investment as far as creating art goes. There's far more in-depth drawings out there, but just to give you a reference of how long something like this might take you if you decide to try it. You could be much quicker than me, or you could be much slower if you want to be more careful. You'll see a lot of times when I'm super zoomed in like this that there's a lot of lines that aren't consistent, or the spacing is bad, or they are supposed to be parallel but they run into one another, that kind of thing. So it's really up to you. I'd recommend giving it a shot, maybe even on just a little postcard. It can be pretty satisfying to look at the final product. Now, I said there were 2 goals that I had in mind. First being consistency, which I will say, I don't know, it's not like you finish a drawing like this and now you are consistent. It's more the act of spending so many hours drawing this has hopefully ingrained a habit of me to reassess as I go on in the drawing. It obviously built up some, muscle control, hopefully, or some sort of muscle memory so I can recreate this in other drawings, but it's not just something I can dump skill points into or whatever. It's a attempt to train a mindset, and we'll see how successful that is moving forward when I do other drawings. Now, the second goal was to kind of treat this as a bit of an editing exercise for videos. It's been a long time since I've made a video, and one of my more recent ones is drawing a cosmic snake eating itself, and a big portion of that video was spent drawing the scales on the snake, and I'm proud of the drawing and I'm happy I made the video, but watching it, that portion of the video is pretty boring, and it's kind of something that I needed to get through really quick or just cut out altogether and just show the end product. And the reason that I thought it was boring, personally, was because it was all the same thing over and over and over. There's not really a way to show that in an interesting way. I mean, there is a way to show that, but I didn't know it at the time. So this video is an attempt to practice making an interesting video through editing of a very repetitious thing. So I decided a pattern like this would be a great practice moment of taking the repetitious stuff and trying different camera angle or different zoom levels, different methods of cutting together video, and different speeds, things like that, playing with all of this stuff to make the video pass in a more interesting way and make the process itself a bit more interesting to watch. So, hopefully it was successful to a degree. I'd love to hear some feedback on that. I have learned a lot of things off the process itself as far as video editing goes. The first is that these medium shots, which are the majority of the video, as I was filming, I have a little viewfinder on the camera I use to film, and in that viewfinder it looks really small if I'm zoomed all the way out, if I'm at the widest setting possible. So in my mind I would say, okay, now's the time. I need to zoom in so the details can be seen. I need to zoom in to create like a really extreme level of engagement. I don't know what exactly. It was just basically zoomed all the way out was too small. You couldn't really see anything. When I was editing it, I realized that zoomed all the way out were probably my favorite shots of the video. So this mid-level zoom, when I look at this, all I see really are hands. You know, I'm not really noticing the detail that I was hoping to impart. It's just fingertips and knuckles. So if I were to do something like this in the future, I think I would just go ahead and use these zoomed in shots much more sparingly and rely instead on the wide angle full detail shots to do most of the heavy lifting. I think you'll see that when eventually we do cut to a wider angle shot, the viewfinder is deceptive on my camera. You can see all the details just fine. You get a bigger picture for how the drawing is progressing. I like it a lot more. But that's a lesson learned, and I think just based off of that, it'd be fair to say the exercise was a success. So, hooray. As for the drawing itself, rather than just my intention with going into the drawing, there are some things that I'm pleased with and some things that I'm dissatisfied with. When you're doing so many patterns, you are forced to come up with a lot of variations of similar patterns. For as much as I relied on some stuff, there are some standouts. So I obviously have hundreds of half circles with parallel lines in it going in different directions, but there are also patterns that I felt very pleased with. Looking at the screen now, I'm recreating a pattern to kind of go through and create maybe some depth of the drawing by having pattern A go under pattern B and resurface on the other side. And if you look at this drawing, these cones, while they're not super even, I think are one of the more varied implementations of pattern in the drawing, as well as the portion just above it where I have a half circle bump with another half circle outlining that bump to create a break in all these parallel lines. I don't know. I don't want to get too hung up on it, but I'm pretty pleased with that particular pattern outcome. And there's others in the drawing that I think went well. For every pattern that is kind of boring and repetitious, there are some that were very fun to come upon. Also, the concept of interlacing. I had the mindset going into this that I did not care so much what level of variation I had. You know, my goal was consistency and editing. Those were the two things I had in mind. And if it was a super interesting composition or not was kind of not really of interest to me. So I think it is interesting at the end, just based on how many lines there are, and you can kind of spend some time looking at it and seeing all the patterns. I am proud of that. But there are points as well where I thought, even with those goals in mind, I want to make some level of variation. So you will see that to add depth, as I mentioned before, I'll weave these patterns over one another. And anytime I did that, I'm pretty happy with how it came out. So if I were to dedicate myself to a big project like this, and I say big, it's actually just the size of your standard sketchbook. It's not particularly large or anything like that. But if I were to dedicate the time to a project similar to this, I think I would really go all in on making these weaves and over-under effects. I think it's the most interesting parts of the drawing are going to be those over-under effects. Also, I am approaching the end of the drawing here, and as I was drawing this, I really had the mindset that, even though I've spent this long on it and I want to get a video out and I want to be done with this drawing and call it a success and all that, I don't want to rush. and I don't want to fill the last little column with uninteresting details. For all that intention, I think I did kind of fall victim to that. I let it get ahead of me, and the mindset of wanting to finish up kind of made itself apparent, but it is what it is. I think it still looks consistent and nice. I'm still proud of it, but I definitely let the eagerness of finishing the job interrupt the job itself. What else is there to say? I don't think there's all that much challenge-wise connected to this drawing. Like I said, it's a time-based endeavor. I'd encourage you to give it a shot yourself and see what sort of patterns you come up with or create. It is a good time to pass, a good effort to pass the time. I think it's worthwhile, and it is very helpful in getting your mind off of specific things if you're stressed or bored with the quarantine going on. Then, I don't know, it helped me. As we near the end of the drawing, I guess I could talk about the pen I'm using. I did get this all done with one pen, though at the end I was certainly feeling the drying out of the pen. It's a 0.1, which I'm not sure how that equates. It's the smallest one of this particular set that I had. I like it a lot. I think you'll see this last column, the strokes are a bit lighter, and there were a lot of times, even near the middle of the page, where I had to go back and forth a couple times or redraw a couple things because the ink wasn't laying down. And I think it's because, I don't know, maybe I was pressing too hard. There are a couple shots in here where, my fingertips are pressed together so tightly, and at first I was worried that I was going to be damaging the pen nib, but I really don't think I did. The pen nib was not squashed at the end. It comes typically as a cone. It's a felt tip technical pen. So those things come out as sharp cones. If you buy a Pigma Micron or something, you'll see it's a pyramid shape. And then as you go on, it gets blunted down just through use, and the friction of the paper blunts it, and you get less precise marks. Your 0.1 might become a 0.2 or something like that as time goes on. And that can just be prevented by carefully regulating how hard you're pressing down on the pen. But in this case, I was not jamming it into the paper. When I'm making these small marks, I tend to grip very tightly so I can control as best as possible. It doesn't work, obviously, all the time, but it's pretty effective in my experience. So we're at the ending of the drawing here. I don't know if I could come up with another pattern if I tried, and I feel I learned a lot, both as far as consistency in mark making and varying up editing. I've got some stuff in mind for my next video, and I hope to get it out quicker than I did this one. So please stay tuned, and thank you for watching. Bye-bye.